Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I have a really fun card for you. We're going to do some fun techniques using a stamp from our sponsor, artneco.com. Remember to mention the Frugal Crafter to save 10% on your order or get free shipping if your order is over $50. I'm going to show you how to blend colored pencil with Gamsol or mineral spirits, and I'm also going to show you how to use liquid applique to give those snowflakes a raised, puffy feeling. So without further ado, let's get started. First, we're going to ink up our stamp with black ink. I'm using archival ink, but Memento ink would also be fine. I'm stamping it on a piece of cold press watercolor paper. And the reason I'm using cold press paper is because it has a little bit of a texture or tooth to the surface, which is going to make it grab a little bit more pigment. Now, I have a lot of people tell me that they have a hard time coloring with colored pencils because it hurts their wrists if they have arthritis. But when you use a rough surface like cold press watercolor paper, it almost acts like a sandpaper and grabs a lot more pigment from the sticks of color. And since we're going to be blending it with Gamsol, which is a solvent in a little bit, you'll find that you don't have to exert a lot of pressure to get a lot of beautiful color this way. So if you've been suffering from wrist problems and you haven't been using your colored pencils, grab them out of the storage, pull them off the shelf, and give them a try with this technique, because I think you'll find that you can use them and it doesn't hurt your wrist so bad. So basically all I've done is gone around the outside of that heart with a darker kind of raspberry colored red. And you probably saw me with a pen there a second ago. When you're working on cold pressed paper, because it has that tooth that I was talking about, it's going to sometimes skip the ink when you stamp on it. So I just went ahead and I filled in, and I drew that little snowbank line, and I filled in some of the areas of the design with the black Sharpie pen. You could use actually any black pen you want. So by using a couple different shades of red, lighter red in the middle and a darker raspberry color on the outside, I could get kind of a three-dimensional depth. I decided to take an even darker kind of brownish auburn red and use that right around the edges just to shadow that a little bit more. And you'll kind of see why you want those three colors when we go to blend it. It just helps give it a little bit of definition. Now I'm going to color in each of the mittens with a kind of pear green color, and I'm going to go around the outsides with a darker evergreen color to just give it a little bit more dimension. Again, it'll all make sense when we go to blend it out. Now I'm using the medium shade red from the heart up on the band that's on the top hat just to kind of tie it in and give it a little bit of festive color. And now we're going to start coloring the hat, and I thought rather than give it just a plain black satin hat, I would give it a navy hat, because that will end up being kind of my highlight, and I'll do black around the edges just to round it out a little bit more. Now I'm going to add some pink to the cheeks, and I like to skip around a little bit while I'm coloring, because if I find a color that I'm adding to one spot and I can do it somewhere else, I try to. So I knew I was going to add this icy blue onto the buttons and also use it as a shadow color, so I went ahead and put some into the hat too. This nice icy color is a very soft shadow color, so you don't have to worry about getting your shadows wrong with this color. So I recommend starting with this. Do the edges of the belly to kind of make him look a little rounder. You can do under the chin and under the hat, and also on the sides of the arms where they touch the body, because that's where you're going to have a little bit more shade and dimension. Like I said, I like to reuse colors whenever I can, so I'm using that same black I used in the top hat to very super gently go over some of that blue where it's going to be the darkest shadow, like right up next to the body. And I'm just darkening things a little bit. Be super cautious with this color if you're using it in a shadow on the white, because it is a very strong color. Most artist quality pencils you get are going to be very pigmented, so that's just going to keep you from getting into trouble. Now, I wanted him to be in front of a dark sky, and instead of cutting him out and sticking him on paper, I figured, hey, why don't I just color it? So with a very light pressure, I am going into the background with the same navy blue that I used on the top hat. I'm using less and less pressure the further closer to the top of the page I get, and I'm working upside down because it's a little more comfortable for me to get in up next to that snowdrift that I sketched in. So, and also look at my pencil, see how I'm using the edge of it? because I am trying to put in a broad area color, I use the edge, and then when I need to get in and get into a tiny space, I use the tip. Now, by doing it that way, using the edge for broad areas and the tip for detail areas, you keep your pencil points sharp most of the time, so that it eliminates the need for you to sharpen them until you basically get it down to nothing. It keeps you from wasting the beautiful pigment in the pencils, and it saves you some time too. So it's a win-win-win, I think. To make the sky a little bit smoother and to temper that color a little bit, I'm going to go in with a lighter blue that we used in the shadows, and I'm going to start that at the top of the sky and work it down into the darker blue that I've already colored. Now, to make sure that my transition in the shadows on the snowman are going to be nice and smooth, I'm going over them and extending a little bit past the shadow areas with white. That's just going to give me a nice blending base for my pencils. Now, I don't want you to worry too much about how much to color before you blend. I like to get as much of my color down as possible first. As you can see, I'm putting a little bit of highlight on that hat, but you can go back in, especially with your darker colors, and redefine and add more darks later. So don't worry if you don't get quite enough pigment in there the first try. You can always go back in, especially when you're working on a toothy surface like this cold press watercolor paper. Also, this watercolor paper is not expensive. You could actually use the cheapest watercolor paper you can find for this technique and it would work fine. To blend this picture, I'm using a product called Gamsol. Now this bottle was made by Gamsol for Spectrum Noir, but you can buy it at any art supply store, or you can also use odorless mineral spirits, goo-gone, or any number of solvents. You could even use baby oil too, but it does limit the amount of color you can add on top after. So what you want to do is take a blending stump and use that to apply the Gamsol to the paper. I don't like to use a paintbrush because it just deposits too much. You just want a very small amount. You could also use a pointy Q-tip like from the dollar store, the kind they sell to put makeup on with. But if your blending stump gets dull, instead of throwing it away, what you can do is use a piece of sandpaper, and this is just an artist sandpaper block, but any fine sandpaper is fine, and you can sand off the dirty parts of the blending stump and you're left with a nice sharp clean area. If you end up with a little burr on the end, all you have to do is snip it off with your scissors and you're back to coloring. I like to use small circular strokes when I'm liquefying the pencil. It seems to work really well, and it may take you a little bit of time to figure out how much pencil you want down for the results that you're looking for, but even in the areas where there's not a ton of pencil, it still liquefies quite well. You can see that I've moved my Gamsol off my paper pad that I work on, and that's just because I'm afraid of tipping it over. It's a good idea to keep a small container, such as an inkwell, handy to put your Gamsol in. It will evaporate fairly quickly if it's not in a tightly lidded container, so I do want to warn you of that. I also want to warn you that Gamsol has absolutely no odor. It honestly smells like water, so please do not leave it out in an open container where your kids or pets could get a hold of it. It kind of freaks me out, honestly, that it has no smell. So I keep mine right in the bottle and I cap it up after use. I haven't noticed redepositing any color into the bottle, even when I go back in and dip, because it just absorbs into the little blending stump as far as I have observed and experienced. But you can do whatever you like. I just warn you to be careful because, like I said, I think a pet or a child could easily mistake that for water. So please be careful in your home and your studio. So you can see how well this is blending together. Partly is that is because I used that lighter pencil at the top just to give it a little bit more media to liquefy in, but you can get a pretty smooth effect this way. And the best part is you don't have to kill your wrists coloring it in. And actually, you don't want to really bear hard on something that you plan on blending later, because you might actually leave dents in the paper that wouldn't liquefy as well, just like if you were using watercolor pencils, which you could totally use watercolor pencils like this and just use a water brush to blend it out if you wanted to. Absolutely fine. So the shadow under the snowman looks a little dark there where I had added the black, but don't worry, we can go back in, we can redefine. I thought I wanted a little bit more dark right up next to the snowman, but maybe I'll soften it out with a little bit of blue too, because I felt like he needed a more substantial snowman because I have a kind of a dark sky behind him, and I just thought that there was just way too much white on the ground there. So there I'm feathering out that shadow with that same icy blue that we used on the snowman, and then simply just keep blending it out. I like to do these big areas first because I find it kind of loosens me up before I get into those teeny tiny little details. I know I'll have a nice steady calm hand by the time I reach that part. So here I'm going into the parts that matter now. I'm getting into the snowman and just blending it out. And I'm keeping this real time because many of you mentioned that you like to see how long it takes rather than having it just sped up. So I did switch to a smaller blending stump here. I like to match the size of the blending stump to the object that I'm trying to blend. And you can actually use these with charcoal and pencils, although I would probably keep a separate set for charcoal if you wanted to use it for pastels or charcoals, just so you don't contaminate your media and get unwanted results. But I do all the same colors, and then I would switch and do darker colors. I also will, instead of sanding down my stumps every time, I'll keep one stump that's got shades of blue and gray on it. I'll have one stump that's got oranges and reds. I'll have one that will have yellows, one that will have greens. They're fairly inexpensive. You can get a package of probably 12 of them for a few dollars, and because you can sand them to clean them, they'll last you probably for years and years, maybe even forever, depending on how much you color. Now this tiny little stick is my red one. You can see it already had some red pigment on there. So I'm using that first to do the cheeks because that was the latest thing. And then I'm doing the brim on the hat. And I noticed that because of the toothy surface of the paper, my hat didn't show up very well, the checkered pattern, so I'll go in and color that later. But look at the heart. Remember, we put a lot of pigment on there, and look how smooth and solid it is when we go to blend it out with that little blending stump. I think it's such a wonderful color payoff when you do this technique. And again, it's less time consuming than trying to color it all and blending it with the pencils, and it saves your wrist if that's an issue that you have. And it's also a fun way to work with pencils that you have sitting in your stash already. It's a new way to use them, which I think is wonderful. So now we need to do the mittens, and then this guy is going to be just about colored, the mittens and the hats. I think it's really cool how when you add the Gamsol, it just almost makes the color glow. I mean, look at how much brighter that looks, and we did not add extra pigment to it. That just blows my mind. It's because you're basically spreading all that pigment out into the hills and valleys of the paper instead of having it just caught on the tooth of the paper. And I think the hat is probably one of my my favorite parts blended out because it just has such a richness of color when you have them all blended together, and it just looks a lot more realistic. And now I'm just touching up some details on the band on the hat with a marker. Now this is a fun product. It's called Liquid Applique, and a girlfriend of mine gave me a tube of this, and I hadn't used it, and I thought this would be just perfect. I was a little worried because it looked kind of like beige in the tube, but you'll see after we heat it up, it just is nice and bright white. So you can barely see how much I am putting down. I'm just doing tiny little drops like the size of the head of a pin. I mean, tiny, like not a quilting pin, but like a sewing pin, a straight pin, tiny little droplets. And I am putting that wherever I want a big snowflake. Now you'll see me put one in the center of that heart, which I regretted, but I think I could probably pick it off if I wanted to. I just wanted to evenly kind of give a layer of snow, kind of just like little snowflakes are falling down. So after you've put out as much as you want, all you have to do is hit it with a heat gun and they will puff up kind of like magic. Watch this. I think it is so fun to watch. And the directions on the tube say to like let it dry overnight, and probably if you're doing it on fabric, that's a really good idea, but I found on cards you could do it immediately and it just looks so fantastic. Isn't that fun? Think of the things you could do that for, like the wool on sheep, if you had a little sheep stamp, or I could even do it on the snowman but I didn't really want him raised. I kind of wanted just like a second dimension there. But I mean, a Santa's beard, that would be a really cool idea. There's lots of different things you can do with that product, and I was kind of psyched to try it out. At this point, I thought my snow needed a little bit of sparkle, so I'm just using a paintbrush and some glitter glue to give my snowman and some of the snow a little bit of sparkly glaze. I usually have really bad luck with glitter glue such as stickles because I try to apply it from the container and I end up with drops which look great until I stick my hand in them. I find that when I brush it on with a paintbrush, I have a lot more control, it dries quickly, and it gives me that subtle sheen that I want, and it's less messy than trying to brush on glue and sprinkle on glitter. So if you have glitter glue, give it a try for this. It works really well. This is just a clear glitter glue too. Cool on other projects. And then you just either need to let that dry or simply blast it with the heat tool for a couple seconds. And there you can see the fun sparkly effect that we got from the glitter glue. And since I've been like kind of obsessed with my white gel pen lately, I thought that, well, I just got to do some shines on the hat and the heart and the nose and all of that stuff, I just think a little bit of highlighting always improves an image, and it doesn't take very long, and it's really easy to do. I also tore off the edge of my card so it would have kind of a pretty deckled edged border. I just did that with my fingers, nothing fancy there. At this point, if you see any areas that you would like to darken or deepen the color, you can go ahead in very gentle circular strokes and color back in with a colored pencil. You don't need to blend this out afterwards unless you feel like it's a little harsh, but I find if you use really soft, gentle circular strokes, it just naturally blends in, and it's very easy to color this way. You can also apply these techniques that I'm showing you today in adult coloring books. I know that it's such a popular trend right now, but some people have expressed discomfort with coloring in them. Go ahead and use your Gamsol. Put a piece of like a scrap paper in between the pages of your coloring book though, so it doesn't bleed through if you do decide to try it. But I thought it looks so much nicer when I deepen up that color right at the edge of the snowdrift there. It just makes it look like kind of the moon is up in the sky, maybe casting a little bit of a glow, and you've got that nice contrast between the snowbank, the snowman, and the sky. I'm also using the same technique to deepen up the color on the hat. I think it really makes it look three-dimensional, and it really pulls the piece together. All it takes is those last details at the end to really make it look like something special. If you want, you can go ahead and add some more shading on the heart and the mittens too, because it's fun. I really enjoy doing this. It's kind of hard to stop the coloring. It's addicting, guys. So after the coloring was done, I mounted that panel onto a piece of a nice royal blue winter themed scrapbook paper from Die Cuts with a View, and then I'm centering it on the top portion of a 5x7 white pre-folded card. I wanted to handwrite a sentiment at the bottom, but to make sure I got my spacing right, what I did was I wrote it out, and then I counted how many letters and spaces I had, and then I found the center letter. And make sure you count the spaces as a letter too when you do that. I determined that T was my center letter, so I started off with a T as close to the middle of the card as I could kind of eyeball. I'm not going to get a ruler out or anything. And then I went ahead and wrote the second half of the word winter and then wishes afterwards. And I'm simply doing a dot-to-dot style of lettering. If you have ever done any scrapbooking, back in I would say the late 90s, early 2000s, the dot-to-dot style of fancy scrapbooking lettering was all the rage. But I have to say I love to bring out this moldy oldie anytime I am stamping and using like a quilted or primitive looking design. I think it really complements it nicely, and it kind of reminds me of when stamping and scrapbooking were new to me, and it just gives me the feels. It makes me feel just all warm and fuzzy inside to do that lettering style again. So then I just start working backwards from that center T, and I basically spell backwards. I don't know if that's how other people do it, but that's how I keep my titles and sentiments centered on my cards and scrapbook pages. Hopefully that tip is useful for you. I even use it when I'm placing stickers because otherwise I end up running off the page or I have it unbalanced. So there's a little quick tip for you. And that pretty much does it for the card. It's not a terribly hard card to make, but I think the colored pencil techniques, if you can learn those, it'll really open up a whole new world of coloring possibilities with all the stamps you already have. The stamp I'm using, of course, as I mentioned before, is from artneco.com. Remember to mention the Frugal Crafter when you order to save 10% or get free shipping if your order's over $50. You'll get the discount that's better. So that's great. They're going to make sure you save the most money, which is just awesome, and they're really nice people. I also thought one more thing on the lettering. I wanted to let you know that I went over with some colored pencil and I traced some of the letters, and I also added some little scribbles of color just to kind of perk it up a little bit. That's totally optional. If you don't like the look of it, don't do it. It's your card. You're the boss of it. You can do whatever you like. I want to thank you for joining me for this Stamp School episode, and if you know any other beginner stampers or advanced stampers that just like to stamp, share this video with them. Sharing is one of the best ways you can help other stampers enjoy this hobby and make sure that it stays around for a long time. I want to thank our sponsor again, artneco.com. Thank you for watching. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Until next time, happy crafting.